Beloved in the Lord, good morning. I'm so happy to be with you today on this episode of Adult Sunday School. My name is Shay Ginny. At the wake of the coronavirus outbreak, it is obvious that many people may not have the opportunity to go to church. That is why I decided to come up with this video so that you can follow up your Sunday school while at home. Our lesson today is titled Follow Godly Leaders from the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 1 to 14. It is actually a series because if you look at what we studied last Sunday, it was about the Holy Spirit being the teacher. Now, Paul wrote this letter because the church in Corinth was divided over who is the best spiritual leader. I mean, there were cliques. Christians had formed cliques. There were people who said, I am the follower of Peter. Others said, I'm a follower of Apollos. Others said, I'm a follower of Paul. Others said, I follow Christ, and so on and so forth. So the church was blessed, and most of the believers had spiritual gifts. They were blessed with spiritual gifts, and so they were being controlled by the gifts that God had given them, and it led to spiritual pride for them to start deciding who they were going to follow. So Paul wrote this letter especially addressing his accusers to make them understand that it is dangerous for them to, be contented in their blessings. That means when you are contented in your blessings, you are likely going to condemn other leaders or people who are worshiping God. And so he wrote this letter. When you look at the way he begins this letter, he mentioned that in verse 1, he speaks about helping us to view leaders as people sent by God. That means stewards or servants whom God has entrusted a responsibility into their hands. Now, if you view your spiritual leader in that manner, you realize that you give them more respect as compared to when you view your spiritual leader like a pastor who has been called by the church to minister. That is a different way. But he goes ahead in verse 2 to make a very important comment that the spiritual leader himself or herself has to be a trusted servant of God. So irrespective of the ministry that you lead in the church, it is important for you to be a faithful servant so that people can trust you and actually view you like someone sent by God and not just an ordinary pastor or leader who has been called to lead over them. He goes ahead in verse 3, when you look at verse 3 to verse 5, to say something very important about his accusers, that he does not really care about human judgment, or he does not even judge himself, because he knows that there is a better judgment that is coming up. So he depends on the judgment of God, because when God judges, he's going to bring to light the things that are hidden. He's going to bring to light the things that are hidden in darkness. That's what he says. And so this is also a very important lesson for us as leaders to learn, because sometimes when we are being criticized by people, we either ruminate in that pain and we try to judge ourselves. We feel like we're guilty or inadequate. But Paul has a pure and clear conscience, and he knows that what he's doing it for God. And he says, even though he doesn't judge himself, he is not innocent, meaning that he knows he's not perfect, but he does not spend his time trying to, he applies grace to his life when he's being criticized. He goes ahead, when you look at verse 6 right down to 10, to say something again very important about the spiritual race. He says that he feels sometimes like God has placed them at the end of the line for the world and the angels to watch them like spectators to their victor parade. That means for them to reach the goal. And so if you look at why he wrote that statement, it's because the believers, they had spiritual gifts and they started boasting. They had this spiritual pride. And so they felt that, okay, we can just sit back there. They started acting like people who had already arrived at the end. But Paul was saying that, look at us. We don't have dresses. We don't have clothes, but you do. We are poor, but you are rich. He even says that we have been dragged, beaten, and insulted, but you have been exalted, you have been humbled, but we've replied with kindness and love. So he is saying that they are still running the Christian race, and he's encouraging them to join them in running that race, because that is the sacrifice you make for being a leader, rather than sitting behind and being contented that they have arrived. And that is the problem in the church sometimes, because There are some people who have spiritual gifts and they behave as though they have already arrived, as though they have achieved the goal. So Paul was writing to encourage them to press on and not to think that they have arrived, lest they will fall. And he ends up in verse 14 with a very powerful verse, which happens to be our memory verse, that they should imitate him just as he imitates Christ. For him to say that, it's because he is sure of what he is doing. He knows that his spirit is grounded in the spirit of Jesus. That is why he urges the believers, the children that he brought to Christ, to follow his footsteps. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you did enjoy the video. If you have any questions or you have any worries, you can always meet your pastor and discuss with them about the aspect of being spiritually contented, which is not good. Let us respect our leaders and show reverence to them. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Shay Jenny.